What's good, everyone? Welcome back. Hope you're doing well today. It's August 9th of 2025, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the death of astronaut Jim Lovell, who is actually quite the legendary figure in the history of NASA spaceflight, as he commanded two different Apollo missions, both Apollo 8 and the befallen Apollo 13, the only of the 7 manned moon missions that failed to land on the moon. Back in 1995, actor Tom Hanks portrayed Jim Lovell in the film Apollo 13 about that space disaster. And in today's video, we're going to look at the significant numerology that connects both of these men to the date August 8th, which is the date that we lost astronaut Jim Lovell. Of course, now the date has been updated to August 7th, but as we will see, this riddle revolves around the number 88 and the date that we learned of his passing, August 8th. Now, as an astronaut who went to the moon on multiple occasions, the number 88 is pretty significant, as this is the number represented by the analemma. If you photograph the sun throughout the year or the moon throughout a phase, you find that both celestial bodies create the number 8 as they travel through the sky. And it just so happens that it was Apollo 8 that Jim Lovell first piloted to the moon. Apollo 8 returned to Earth in the year 68. Of course, Lovell born in the year 28. But I want you to look at how old Jim Lovell was on this date, December 27th of 68. The astronaut was 14,888 days old when Apollo 8 splashed down back on planet Earth. Now, this number here, 888, is very significant in the language of Gematria. 3.14 has a Latin value of 888. This is the cipher I teach that I believe is the most significant and the only one not based in the current alphabetic order. Of course, Gematria primarily revolving around the base 4 methods. And in the second part of this video, we're going to look at how the mathematics of the circle are integral to this entire riddle, the skull and bones code, the number 666 as well. So Jim Lovell commands 2 Apollo missions, both 8 and 13. Well, this stands out because using triangular numbers, the name Jim Lovell sums to 813. But these digits stand out for another reason. Jim's last name was Lovell, and it's pronounced the first syllable as love. Well, the planet of love is Venus. And yesterday, the day that we learned about Lovell's death, was Friday. Friday, the day of the week that is named for the planet Venus. In the time it takes Venus to orbit the sun 13 times, the Earth orbits the sun exactly 8 times. So 8 Earth years is 13 Venusian years. Again, 813, the value of Jim Lovell, pilot of Apollos 8 and 13. This shape created is called the Venus rose in astrology. Notice how Venus rose equals 138 in the alphabetic order, while rose of Venus has that same value in the reverse order. Well, 138 is also the sum of divine feminine. Notice this 138 in the alphabetic order. Well, this brings us to a massive divine feminine space ritual which played out in April earlier this year. You may recall when the Blue Origin flight took off with an all-female crew, 5 different women aboard, including musician Katy Perry. And if you saw my work on that, this was all synced up to the Divine Feminine Code. This post is linked below if you want more information on this. Well, notice how Divine Feminine gives us this very special 911 in Latin Gematria. And it just so happens that Jim Lovell passed away 116 days, whether you take the date he died or the date that news broke. These are both 116 days after that all-female flight. And this is an upside-down 9/11. But there's something else very special about this date. As the flight took off on April 14th this year with the all-female crew. Well, April 14th was a very significant date to Apollo 13, the second flight to the moon, piloted by Jim Lovell. If you look at the details of this accident, where an oxygen tank exploded en route to the moon, we see that this happened approximately 56 hours after takeoff. Well, 56 hours is a little bit over 2 days, about 2 days and 8 hours. So that means the date of the explosion was April 14th, Greenwich Mean Time, as it would have been the early morning hours that day, April 14th. And April 14th, again, the same date that the all-female astronaut crew took off on Blue Origin. In fact, that explosion on board Apollo 13 on April 4th, this was a span of 1 year, 109 days after the return of Apollo 8. So it appears as if Jim Lovell's astronaut career was coated with this divine feminine aspect in mind. And despite the fact that he was 97 years of age, he still dies by the numbers because we all inhabit this same mathematical matrix that we are meant for. Notice how the phrase divine feminine also equals 240 and 78. Lovell's full name, James Arthur Lovell Jr., equals 240 and 78. Lovell, also 78. And 78 is also the reduction gematria of Thomas Jeffrey Hanks, who portrayed Jim Lovell in the 1995 film Apollo 13. Now, in that movie, Apollo 13, anybody who saw it, and probably most people who didn't, still remember the one famous line from this film that is repeated to this day. Houston, we have a problem. Which were the words muttered by Jim Lovell to Space Command after the explosion on board. Using standard English gematria, which is structured identically to Latin, but instead uses the current 26-letter alphabet, the phrase, Houston, we have a problem, equals 1995. Which is pretty incredible, since 1995 is the year that the movie with this line was released. Houston is also where former President George H.W. Bush passed away. Remember, he was a resident of Houston, often seen at Houston sporting events. Notice how the city of Houston has gematria of both 223 and 322. This is important because George H.W. Bush, as well as his son George W. Bush, were graduates of Yale University and members of the Skull and Bones Secret Society. In the year 2023, Yale turned 322 years old, syncing up with Skull and Crossbones and, of course, the number on the Skull and Bones emblem. Well, if you measure from that special Skull and Bones anniversary of Yale to the death of astronaut Jim Lovell, we find that he died exactly a span of 1 year and 10 months later. His death was also a span of 1 month and 10 days after June 30th, which is the date that Apollo 13 was first released to cinema. In the standard alphabetic order, Jim Lovell equals 110. This also brings us to the capitals added cipher, which maintains the alphabetic order but adds 26 for each capital letter. Both Apollo 13 and Lovell sum to 110 in these methods. Skull and Crossbones, as well as Death, both with 110 Gematria. And if you instead measure from the founding date of NASA to Jim's passing, it was a span of 11 days later. And when it comes to the number 11, well, of course, the first successful manned moon landing was Apollo 11. This number 11 is also represented in the name Tom Hanks, which equals 101 in ordinal, the actor who played Lovell on the silver screen. Tom Hanks was born in the city of Concorde, California, which also equals 101, like Skull and Bone Society. But this fact that Tom Hanks was born in Concorde actually brings us to another significant element of this riddle, as we will see. But first, check this out. Concorde, California also has reduction gematria of 88. So does the state California in ordinal. Moon landing is 808, while failed moon landing is 88. Apollo 13, the only failed moon landing of the 7 missions. When the explosion on board Apollo 13 occurred, it was on a date with 88 numerology, 4 plus 14 plus 70. And once again, Lovell has now died on August 8th, or 8/8, the date of his news. And again, this said August 8th yesterday. This is what all outlets were reporting, so this is a new development right before this video that they changed this. Now, 88 is made up of 4 circles. And a circle is made up of 360 degrees. This means the number 88 contains 1,440 degrees. Well, the Apollo 13 explosion happened on the date 14/4, which again is the same date that Blue Origin took off with an all-female crew. There's actually 1,440 minutes every single day. But look at the Sumerian value of Jim Lovell's full name, the alphabetic order times 6. James Arthur Lovell Jr. equals 1440. The numerical relation between Jim Lovell and Tom Hanks are undeniable. These two men were born 10,333 days apart from one another, which is pretty interesting considering that Tom Hanks played this astronaut in the movie Apollo 13. And in the reverse alphabetic order, Jim Lovell equals 133. You may recall that back in the year 2020, Tom Hanks and his wife Rita were the two celebrities who were the first ones diagnosed with the CV19 bug. And notice how coronavirus equals 1303, which contains these same digits. It was the 13th of March, or 1303, when Donald Trump declared a COVID emergency in the United States. But just think about this for a second. Jim Lovell, involved in the greatest space catastrophe, well, not the biggest, but the one that occurred furthest from Earth, I guess you could say. Certainly one of the most famous space disasters. And in this case, a miraculous one, as they made it back safe. Well, in history, another very famous accident involving highly skilled pilots was the Concorde crash in 2000 in the nation of France. And for some of the younger viewers, back in 2000, there was this new fleet of super fast jets that flew faster than the speed of sound. And a lot of rich people liked to fly this until this crash occurred, which ultimately led to the discontinuation of this airplane. So Tom Hanks, who portrays Jim Lovell, born in Concorde. And the numerical relations here are intense. First off, when Jim Lovell died, check out how old Tom Hanks was. A span of exactly 829 months. This is the 145th prime number, and August 8th leaves 145 days in the year. Lovell's death was also 9,145 days after the Concorde disaster. The Concorde was operated by Air France, which equals 225 in Latin. And this is reminiscent of the digits in this current year, 2025. Lovell's death was 20,205 days after the Apollo 13 explosion. And consider how he's dead at the age of 97, which is the 25th prime number. The phrase plane crash equals 97. This is also the gematria of skull and crossbones, brotherhood of death, and just the word death. More on skull and bones in a second. Lovell's death was also 1,306 weeks after the Concorde crash, as well as 136 days after his own birthday. The Apollo 13 explosion was caused by an oxygen tank, which equals 136. 136, the 16th triangular number. Jim died exactly 16 months after the last time the moon completely blocked the sun. Of course, that happened over the United States. Concorde, California, also with that 16 in ordinal. Now, this eclipse that occurred last year was called the Great American Eclipse, which equals 724. This matches the Brotherhood of Death, in Latin 724, like Jesuits. Also, Number of the Beast 724. When the Concorde disaster occurred, Jim Lovell was exactly 72 years and 4 months of age. July 24th, or 724, was the date Hulk Hogan died this year. And if you check out my video on him, you'll see how that was also synced up to the Skull and Bones code. But look at this. The Apollo 13 explosion happened exactly 611 weeks after the founding of NASA. The Concorde disaster happened 11,060 days later. Brotherhood of Death, 611. like blood sacrifice. The Brotherhood of Death is the nickname of the Skull and Bone Society at Yale University. And think about how this connects back to the divine feminine, right? Because the number 116 is the upside down 9/11. And this is what we discussed at the top of the video, how the astronaut whose name is Lovell connected to the planet of love. All right, so next up, I want to look at how this is all attributed to the geometry of the moon, the sun, and the code of lunar and solar eclipses, which are perhaps best attributed through the Skull and Bones code. Now, today, August 9th, is the date of a full moon, which Lovell died on the cusp of. And ever since the year 1923, every new moon has been numbered. Jim Lovell died during Brown lunation number 1269. Now, this ends with the digits 269. In Latin Gematria, his full name, James Arthur Lovell Jr., equals 2690, which in numerology represents 269. And the number 269 is the 57th prime number. And it seems like no coincidence that the moon, which sums to 57 in ordinal, has a 57-degree range of declination around the plane of the sun. Lovell was the astronaut for Apollo 8, which shares the 57 with the Hebrew value of the word eclipse. Now, of course, a very significant number to the moon is 13. Consider how the word moon begins with the 13th letter, ends with the 13th letter in reverse, and the moon has the same 99 gematria as the number 13. Every couple of years, we get 13 full moons. So this points us to the disastrous Apollo mission, Apollo 13. Skull and Bones also has the 130 in ordinal. James Arthur Lovell equals 103. He died 1 week and 3 days after NASA's founding date. Concorde and Apollo 13 both connect to the number 130 in caps added. They both also equal 41. And that's important because 41 is the 13th prime number. And check out the date numerology for Lovell's death. 8 plus 8 plus 25 equals 41. This date also had numerology of 61 and 25. It was also the 220th day of the year. Skull and Bones is 41. Skull and Crossbones 61. Yale University 205, and the Brotherhood of Death 220. So although it may have been August 7th when Lovell passed away, hopefully now we know why August 8th was the date this entered the public conscience. Tom Hanks was exactly 69 years and 1 month of age for Lovell's death. The number 691 is the Latin sum of eclipse of the sun and masonry. The Brotherhood of Death also shares this value. Well, Jim Lovell died 487 days after the Great American Eclipse. This is the 93rd prime number. in a very important number to the sun, which is an average of approximately 93 million miles from Earth. Tom Hanks, his full name equals 93, just like skull and crossbones in the same cipher. Finally, let's look at how this all circles back to the digits in pi and the number of the beast. Tom Hanks' birthplace of Concorde, California connects to the number 666, which is the sum of the sun's magic square. These 36 squares added together have a total sum of the number of the beast. The third multiple of 666 is 1998. And notice how Jim Lovell died 10,998 days after the movie Apollo 13 hit theaters. A huge number for the moon is 223. Solar and lunar eclipses from the same Saros series are separated by 223 synodic months, or lunar phases. Of course, a lunar phase, just a little bit over 29.5 days. In ancient Hebrew Gematria, the word for the moon equals 223. Again, Houston with the 223 and the 322. These digits are also integral to the mathematics of the circle. The word circle also equals both of these numbers. 223 and 322 are also the same numbers, the first two numbers that equal pi in the alphabetic order, 314. Apollo 13 also has this 314 in satanic gematria. And Jim Lovell died 300 months and 14 days after the Concorde plane crash. The 314th prime number is 2083, and this brings us to 666, which remarkably sums to the 314th prime number. To make this undeniable, mathematics of the circle, mathematical perfection, and perfection all sum to 666. This is, of course, a significant number to NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, a 666 in reverse. Fake moon landing, a 666 in satanic, a cipher which is constructed specifically around this number. Is that a coincidence? The moon landing missions occurred on the Apollo craft, which is another 666. Lovell died 669 days after Yale's Skull and Bones anniversary. Brotherhood of Death with the 666. On the calendar, 666 days is equivalent to 21 months and 27 days. And check out how 666 equals 2127 in standard gematria. This is intriguing in light of the dates of Apollo 8, which took off on the 21st and then returned on the 27th, like 2127. Well, it just so happens that that flight occurred during Jim Lovell's 2127th week. So just so you see how this works, December 21st of 1968, when he first went to space on the Apollo craft, he was exactly 2126 weeks. So this was his 2127th week when it returned on the 27th. all a riddle for the number of the beast. But of course, there's more. 666 equals 275 in the alphabetic order. And again, that's the sum of the magic square of the sun. The Son of God, Jesus Christ, also has the 275. The Concorde, also with 275 Gematria. And these are the same digits found in the Concorde crash. July 25th, 725. Now, if you flip that date backwards, 725 becomes 527. Tom Hanks was 5,027 days old for the explosion on Apollo 13, which he would later recreate in Hollywood. 527 is skull and bones in Latin. If you instead write out the and, skull and bones equals 572 and 752. Jim Lovell died on the first day of the 1,572nd week since the movie came out in 1995. So, similar to how this was his, 2,127th week for Apollo 8. Well, now, when he's passed away, it's the 1,572nd week, right? 572, which is a big skull and bones number. Now, if you check out the links in the description, you'll find a link to my blog post on this with some more interesting notes. The one thing I did want to mention is that Lovell is the second Apollo 13 astronaut to die, the first being Jack Swigert back in 1982. He actually died on the anniversary of the return of Apollo 8, for what it's worth. But these two astronauts died 2,223 weeks apart. So there we are again, 223, skull and crossbones. But the phrase, Houston, we have a problem, also equals 2223. Is that true, Zenith? That is really weird. Just looking at the chat here, and in part 1 of this post, I made this observation about Jim Lovell and the number 88 and how this all connects to the date April 14th, which is the date of the Apollo 13 explosion. Wow. So, for those of you who don't know, Zenith of the Alpha has been a devoted follower of the channel and has done a lot of his own work on his own channel, so definitely check him out, subscribe to him. And he's always dropping, like, the wildest nuggets in my chat. And this one kind of blows my mind. I'm talking about this connection with, how 88 is 4 circles, and 4 circles is 360 degrees. And that equals 1440. Well, in Gematria, I just got nerd chills looking at this. 360 degrees plus 360 degrees plus 360 degrees plus 360 degrees equals 1440 in the alphabetic order. That is redunculous. And remember, in the book of Revelation, 144 is measured on 4 different occasions. That's kind of a huge part of that mathematical riddle. The book of Revelation revealing the number of the beast to be 666. It's really just exploring the mathematics of the circle in the most apocalyptic, cryptic way possible. This phrase also, by the way, summing to 1800, which is 600 plus 600 plus 600. Also notice the 630 in reverse, because the movie Apollo 13 was released on 6/30, June 30th. So here's just a quick glance. The book of Revelation, there's 4 different verses that mention 144, 144. And it all starts in Revelation 7:4. I don't want to get too deep into this, but 740 is the Greek isopsephy value of the word circle. So that's pretty incredible. And huge props for that find. The number 88 also equals 69 in reduction. Circles is 69 in ordinal. Pi, 69 in Latin. 69 also the astrological symbol for Cancer, which is the only sign ruled by the moon. And the moon is the giant circle in the sky, which eventually intersects with the sun during an eclipse. Eclipse equals 69. So, once again, it's a little disappointing that they changed this date to August 7th. But again, this entire decode was centered around the number 88. I never measured to August 7th. And don't forget, when you include the end date, this means you will often end up with the same date duration anyway. Oh, this is interesting too. The last note I'll throw at you guys before I sign off today is how old Jim Lovell was on the date of the Apollo 13 explosion. Notice how he was exactly 42 years and 3 weeks old for that disaster. Well, 423 is simply the moon in the standard alphabetic order. In standard Gematria. In the standard alphabetic order, 2,160 miles is 423. And this is the diameter of the moon at its equator, 2,160 miles. And when you multiply 6 times 6 times 6, right? It's 216. So even the diameter of the moon connects to the number of the beast. Mathematics of the circle. 216. So I hope this makes sense of why channels like mine are censored and removed from the public consciousness, because we bring knowledge to the world, and knowledge uplifts humanity and creates brighter minds, which leads to a better future. But that'll be me stepping off my soapbox for now. Want to thank everybody for checking it out. Like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. If you really like to support this work and keep everything going, check the links down below in the description. Become a member of gematrinator.com. That's my website, my calculator, which has helped bring this archaic, ancient knowledge back to the forefront of society for the first time in hundreds of years, if not millennia. And yeah, those donations help to keep the site going, gives you additional decoding powers, and also keeps my legs going, keeps the channel afloat. So thanks again, everybody. Peace, love, God bless. We'll talk to you all next time. See ya.